Syrian regime taking the world stage with its address today at the UN General Assembly. Syria's foreign minister denying the Assad regime ever used chemical weapons on its own people, and that Syria will abide by a U.S. and Russian deal to turn over their chemical weapons. But my next guest says that deal lacks teeth and will be hard to enforce. Ami Horowitz is the director of the documentary You and Me. He spent quite a bit of time putting together his thoughts about the UN, and you've been critical, Ami. You took a look at the ironies, really, of the UN. What do you find ironic about the situation today with Syria?
Oh, where do I begin talking about the ironies of the UN? But first of all, Jenna, thanks for having me on again. The first time I was on here, you had me in studio, and the subsequent interviews we've conducted, I've been down this dungeon. Am I supposed to read something into that?
You're not, Ami, I promise. It's just a new studio growing pains.
Fair enough.
But we always enjoy having you on because you've looked so deeply at the UN, and a lot of us, when we read the headlines about the UN, sort of brush over it, like, oh, well, you're right, at the UN, that's where this is supposed to happen. But with what Syria is doing today and their stance on chemical weapons, why do you have concerns about where this actually goes from here?
Well, you used the word irony to lead off the segment, and I think that really, I think the word irony was really created to describe the United Nations. It's saturated with irony and hypocrisy. And I think no greater example is having Bashar Assad address the UN while he's slaughtering hundreds of thousands of his own people. I think this is par for the course for this organization, and I think that the UN General Assembly, which is the Lollapalooza of lunacy, is the showcase for it all. But you mentioned the fact that they had this resolution, and that's nice. Well, am I supposed to think problem solved? Because it really doesn't.
So, Ami, but that's where people will say, well, listen, if it's not in the UN, if we don't get together in the UN, then where are we going to get together? What do you say to the critics of your point of view that say, listen, this is why the UN was created, to bring together all these sides so they can all speak?
There's no question, but words are cheap, right? I mean, words are great, but how does that actually concretely solve the problem? And this resolution is a perfect example of that. Yeah, it sounds great. Everybody agreed to it, shockingly, even Russia. But the reality is there's no teeth to it. And that if they actually want to take concrete steps to go after the Syrians, they have to go back for a resolution for use of force. And Russia is never going to allow that. So the whole thing is theater of the absurd.
Some are saying it's a victory because Russia finally agreed to something. After years and years of stopping any resolutions against Syria, they've come to the table. Is that a positive sign?
Well, let's give them a cookie. I mean, I don't know. It's positive to the extent that they're willing to have the conversation. I mean, until I see concrete steps, until I see the weapons inspectors actually cleaning out the weapons. And by the way, all this time that we've given them, what's it done? We have now reports from Lebanon and Iraq that they are transferring dozens of trucks out of Syria into Lebanon and Iraq. I wonder what those trucks have. But buying time is what the UN gives Syria, and the Russians are, in my view, gift wrapping that for them.
Quick final thought about humanitarian aid, because that's something else that's come up in this resolution about how to get humanitarian aid to the people that are really on neither side of the conflict but are hurting in Syria. Based on your research, how good is the UN in doing that?
They're pretty good. I think they're certainly better than anywhere else that they work on, certainly better in terms of security policy. If I want to nitpick on that, I probably could, but it's certainly the best thing they do, and I applaud them for it, and they should absolutely continue doing that, and we should support them in those efforts.
Ami, it's great to have you on. I promise next time we'll be face-to-face.
I look forward to it.
If I can work it out, I promise. Ami, thank you.
Pleasure.